Conference play is about to begin for the West Virginia Mountaineers, and that conference play is about to open up with a game against Oklahoma State, the Oklahoma State Cowboys. This Saturday, an ABC national primetime game for those two squads, both 1-0 on the year, but both maybe coming off of games they weren't too excited about from week one against competition not near what they're about to encounter here as we open up Big 12 conference play. I'm Mike Asti here, and this will be a broadcast and a conversation with Dave Hunziker, who is the play-by-play voice of the Oklahoma State Cowboys for both football and men's basketball right here for WV Sports Now and, of course, on Pittsburgh Sports Live. So, Dave, thanks for joining me, man. I definitely appreciate the time. Obviously, you're tapped into what's going on with Oklahoma State on both of those two fronts, calling those games. And Oklahoma State's coming off of a 16-7 win over Tulsa. So you guys are 1-0 on the season, whereas Mountaineers also 1-0 on the year with a victory over Eastern Kentucky. Neither one of those two games probably leave either programs feeling that great after the outcomes, but nonetheless getting the wins. This is going to be kind of a revenge factor for the Mountaineers off of the last couple encounters with Oklahoma State, while Oklahoma State looking to also start off their conference play schedule on the right track. I guess I want to get things started with number one. What should Mountaineer fans who maybe aren't as familiar with Oklahoma State, who don't clearly watch Oklahoma State every week as you are calling Oklahoma State games every week, what should WVU fans expect out of the Oklahoma State Cowboys? Because unlike WVU, there's expectations coming into this year to win right now for Oklahoma State. WVU is kind of rebuilding, looking to get back to glory under Neil Brown. Maybe we call in WVU media, we call last year 0, and this really year 1, to be fair to him. A better team, but not tons of expectations. Oklahoma State, though, 15th in the country. Expectations are there. Expectations are there for even the running back Hubbard, maybe for Heisman candidacy. Didn't really see that come to fruition in week 1. Obviously, a lot to prove in week 2. But what should Mountaineer fans expect out of Oklahoma State, their week 2 opponent, as conference play opens up here in our little bizarre pandemic 2020 season?
Honestly, I'm not sure what to tell you because there were some very significant injuries that Oklahoma State suffered in the Tulsa game. They lost both starters on the right side of the offensive line. We don't know what their situation is. So the right side of the offensive line was already full of youth. Cole Birmingham was making his first career start. Hunter Anthony was making his 5th career start. We're not sure what their status is going to be moving forward. And the starting quarterback, Spencer Sanders, was injured in the first quarter and didn't return. We don't know what his status is. It ended up being the true freshman, Shane Illingworth, that came in off the bench in the second half after Ethan Bullock, a junior college transfer, had struggled. Illingworth hadn't practiced in 2 weeks because of COVID contact tracing. So they didn't even know if they were going to dress him out. I'm not exaggerating. There was debate as to whether even to dress out Illingworth because he hadn't done anything in 2 weeks. He goes out there and goes 4 for 5 for 74 yards, helps lead the team on a couple of scoring drives. What you can expect is a very good defense, a defense that played well in Morgantown last year, has 10 starters back. They've played very well in preparing for the season and against Tulsa. They saved them against Tulsa because offensively they struggled. They weren't really going all that well before the injuries, but when the injuries occurred, it really got hard. So offensively, not sure what to expect. Defensively, they're pretty darn good. That sounds really strange coming from someone that plays that calls games for Oklahoma State, because that's not been the operating procedure here. But it is 2020, so things are a lot of things are backwards.
Yeah, I'll say, and that is kind of backwards. I feel like even the casual fans probably aware that that's backwards. Oklahoma State, generally a program that screams offense, a typical Big 12 program that maybe defense has held back the program in years. Certainly the Mountaineers can relate to that being the situation over the years as well. And I was looking at kind of what happened in the box score there for Oklahoma State before we went to record this, and I did see a myriad of quarterbacks. So that's definitely going to be an interesting situation, the Mountaineers having youth at quarterback, but at least having continuity right now, and the offensive line also a question mark for WVU. Now, in particular, when it comes to Oklahoma State, and again, speaking with Dave Hunziker, the play-by-play voice of the Oklahoma State Cowboys football and men's basketball, so maybe we'll bring him on to preview or recap some men's basketball games, since that season's going to be happening as well. So we'll see what happens there in the future. But Hubbard, 27 for 93, 27 carries for 93, a little over 3 or so per carry. Obviously, there's hype around him. He really wasn't able to have one of those dominating performances against a program like Tulsa that you hate to say this, but if you have Heisman hopes, you do need normally to pad the stats against the program that is not in conference play, that maybe you feel like is a team that as you're starting the season, like in Eastern Kentucky or Tulsa, like a lot of these programs have had to start this year because of the pandemic and reshuffling the schedule, you want to pad those stats in that type of game. He did not get to do so. Fails at 100 yards rushing, which is uncommon for him. They win 16-7. He was a focal point with the quarterbacks going down. But I would think, I didn't get to watch the game, but I would think that when you have 3 quarterbacks, all the injuries, you're not throwing the ball tons, the running back would be who you would rely on, and you would see 150 yards or something from him. Not the case. But tell Mountaineer fans about Hubbard, what maybe to expect with Hubbard, and if you feel like there's a legitimacy to conversations about the Heisman or even the NFL around him, because if you're just looking at this season and looking at week 1, there's not enough there to say that, but there's tons of hype around this kid. And it's now, you mentioned it, a little different of a team for Oklahoma State. This looks to be an Oklahoma State team that is guided by defense and the running game, which is not, again, the norm for Oklahoma State.
Well, the interesting thing is that last year he played at about 70% health most of the year and still rushed for almost 2,100 yards. He was hurt.
Right.
As amazing and crazy as that sounds, it's the truth. And by the time we got to Morgantown, he was maybe playing at 50 to 60%. Okay. And he wasn't healthy the whole year because his injury was in camp and he just kind of kept on going. So I expected him to come out, and he's faster because he's healthy, believe it or not. I think he's more effective, but there just wasn't much blocking for him. He was a keyed guy for sure for Tulsa defensively. Then you add into the fact the offensive line struggled, then got guys hurt, and it just became a mess. And so he's still explosive. He's a guy that's a home run threat every time he touches the ball. It'll be interesting to see if Oklahoma State gets its entire offensive line back. Even if they do, will they continue to go about things the same way? If they don't, will they change things up? I don't know. We'll see what the midweek brings. But certainly there's a desire to get him out into space and let him go. I mean, gosh, I think, if I remember correctly, 44 of his 93 yards came in the fourth quarter. Okay. He did not have much of anything production-wise until the fourth quarter when he finally popped off a couple runs. I think he had only one run longer than 8 yards, and this is a guy that last year had, goodness, I think 3 or 4 touchdown runs of more than 70 yards or more. So he's an important element. He is, he is a Heisman Trophy level guy if he has the right pieces around him, in particular on the offensive line. And so, we'll just kind of see how that all plays out.
Yeah, and Hubbard, 27 carries, 93 yards, an average of 3.4. He does have a touchdown, longest run there being 20 yards, and able to tack on a lot more of those yards in that fourth quarter. Was maybe some misleading, maybe empty calories there. And a game that Oklahoma State won, he certainly didn't have a bad day. Unfortunately, you have to kind of judge him on a higher standard because of the hype machine, and you do need to tack on those yards in a game against Tulsa. The Mountaineers, though, 1-0, as well as Oklahoma State 1-0 entering this game as both teams open up conference play here in the Big 12. Dave Hunziker, the play-by-play voice of Oklahoma State football and men's basketball here as we preview that game for the Mountaineers on WV Sports Now and Pittsburgh Sports Live. Now, we were talking about Hubbard and his Heisman candidacy, and it does make sense that offensive line is a big deal. And that also kind of makes these two programs, I mean, they're honestly very similar historically. They're kind of similar to their standing right now, at least recently in the Big 12 Conference. And they're kind of built similarly right now. This is almost a game where these teams are in a way mirroring each other, maybe not as much of a veteran group for the Mountaineers. So we will see what happens. Oklahoma State with the victory last year, 20-13. We know about a couple of years ago, I'm sure Mountaineer fans are well aware, Oklahoma State's win, and that was a year that Oklahoma State was not a bowl-eligible team, but the victory over the Mountaineers ruined the Mountaineers' hopes of being in the Big 12 title game, unless they somehow could have beat Oklahoma, which did not happen. I do want to get your thoughts, though, because clearly you're tons around the program. You're calling all these games. You've been covering Oklahoma State for a while. And another similarity, this is an interesting segue, but another similarity these programs have faced this year is in the offseason, they both dealt with scandal. The Mountaineers dealing with scandal, having to let go of the defensive coordinator, Vic Koenig, because of some comments and issues with players and feeling uncomfortable playing under him and some maybe allegations of racism around him. He eventually could not continue despite his relationship with Neil Brown. And that chapter has kind of closed, and everybody's able to come together and kind of mature from there. But Oklahoma State dealing with something similar, and arguably maybe something that was maybe a worse situation, because that was an assistant coach for the Mountaineers. It was not an issue of Neil Brown's job or any controversy over Neil Brown as the head coach. You can replace an assistant even though it's difficult. But Mike Gundy, who, again, unlike Neil Brown, who just got to Morgantown, Mike Gundy's been with Oklahoma State a long time, becoming a staple of that program, arguably the face of the program, even as a head coach. He's on the national shows. He's on game day. There's not really a player having those conversations. And he was involved in a scandal this past offseason on a T-shirt that he had on that represented a network that maybe some players, including Hubbard, did not appreciate. What went on, as much as you can tell us about in-house during that scandal? How did they get over that? Because it clearly appears they have gone over that scandal. And is that still affecting the program at all now? I mean, he was even on game day this past weekend, and it seemed like he kind of tried to sweep that under the rug when they tried to bring it up. He doesn't seem to want to talk about it much, but the program seemingly has got over that issue. But it clearly affected the program at the time because it got national attention.
I think they have. I think the thing that's occurred out of it is that the relationship between the players and coaches is stronger than what it's been.
Okay.
I think sometimes that can sort of weaken a little bit and you don't even realize it. And I think that maybe is what happened. And those relationships are stronger. I know, like back in preseason camp, they took a couple of days off in the midst of some of the racial unrest just to sit with the players and have some discussions about what was going on and how they felt about it. So I think they're past it. I think the relationship between coaches and players is stronger than what it's been. I think they acknowledged some of the shortcomings maybe as coaches they had, and they were pretty honest with the players and said, we can do better. We need to do better. And I think that they have. So you haven't heard much. I don't get the sense that it's much on the players' minds, if at all.
Okay.
I think for Chuba, it's been more of, I think he's of the opinion, I just want to go out and prove how good I am and get people to think about me as a football player and not about what happened in June. So I like to think they're past it. You never know what exactly an undercurrent is, but I don't have any sense that it's something that's on the front of anyone's minds right now. I think they've moved on.
And another difference to the two scandals that both programs had to deal with, the Mountaineers were able to remove Vic Koenig from the situation, which kind of then alleviated the issue. And unfortunately, the player that kind of started that train is not able to get on the field right now. So he's currently not playing due to an injury and not really with the program in terms of the future, whereas Hubbard's a Heisman candidate and Mike Gundy's the head coach. So they're still there. So that's a little difference as well. Now, what I do want to ask you, and this is another interesting part of this game that is played every year between the Mountaineers and Oklahoma State, which has been owned by the Cowboys in recent memory and ruining some seasons for WVU. Dave Hunziker here, the play-by-play voice of Oklahoma State men's basketball and, of course, football here, talking with us about what to expect from this game to open up conference play between the Mountaineers and the Oklahoma State Cowboys here, WVU Sports Now and Pittsburgh Sports Live. But, Dave, I do want to ask you what the Oklahoma State, maybe fans, media, just kind of contingent, what their thoughts are on West Virginia, obviously newer to the conference, but the involvement in recent years with Oklahoma State winning these games, ruining some seasons for the Mountaineers. Do you believe there's a budding rivalry here, at least on the revenge factor for WVU, especially if WVU could snag a win here eventually? Do you sense any conversation that's different than maybe prior to the recent games when WVU first entered the conference? Is there any anything amongst the Oklahoma State fans that could maybe build this into somewhat of a rivalry? What is the perspective of West Virginia from Oklahoma State?
It's very positive, honestly. And I
Okay.
think there's only so much hate to go around. And the hate is
It's
pointed
true.
toward Norman, and the hate is pointed toward Austin
Yeah.
for the most part.
Okay.
And
That's fair.
there's still some folks that are pretty peeved at what Iowa State did to Oklahoma State in 2011 when it knocked the Cowboys out of the national championship game. So, and in basketball, well, we all sort of point toward Lawrence. I don't think anybody's very fond of them besides themselves. Of course, when you've won it as many times as they have, the conference, that's you're got the X on your back. So no great shocker there.
Sure.
I think as far as West Virginia is concerned, I think our fans have an appreciation for them. And really, even though there's a distance certainly geographically between the two schools, there seems to be kind of a nice connection. The schools are not that, they're not they're not as different as you would think is what I'm trying to say.
Sure.
There's some similarities. There's some similarities athletically. I think the fervor for college sports in West Virginia is so similar to what it is in Oklahoma. We have two schools here that are playing in the same conference, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. So fans are split as far as who they root for.
Sure.
But that fervor for college sports is a great thing. And I think West Virginia fans, from talking to people in Morgantown over the years and some good friends I have there, they quickly realized that, we lost our rivalries and that's a really bad thing. And all these schools are a zillion miles away. Yeah. But I think WVU fans enjoy the fact that in the Big 12, everybody takes college sports as seriously as they do. Whereas in previous conferences, there were a lot of teams in pro markets that didn't have big fan bases. Maybe it wasn't quite the same in terms of the fervor. In the Big 12, everybody loves their teams as much as the WVU fans love their Mountaineers. And I think that's a good thing. But I think that it's friendly fire. Dana Holgerson was Mike Gundy's offensive coordinator and really helped energize the turnaround of this program. I say turnaround. It wasn't a turnaround. It was taking it to another level. They were rolling here as it was. I mean, they were ranked in the top 10 in 2008, a play or two away from having a chance to get in the national championship that year. But it took it to a different level when Dana came here and installed the spread. And even though he was just here for a year before going to Morgantown, there's that obvious connection. There were other coaches off the Oklahoma State staff that went with him to Morgantown. So it's pretty friendly. A lot of respect there, but it's pretty friendly. May not be that way with West Virginia because I know 2 years ago they think of that game in Stillwater where the Mountaineers, I think, were up 17 points in the second half, or at least 13 or 14 points. I don't remember the exact number.
Right. And
ended up losing that game and lost a lot with it. But I think from an Oklahoma State standpoint, it's been pretty friendly and just a good respect.
I would say that makes sense, and it's probably the same from the Mountaineer perspective in terms of these are similar programs historically, similar level of success historically, and you look at both being in states without – well, Oklahoma does have the Oklahoma City Thunder, but without a love affair of a myriad of pro teams. And Oklahoma did not have a pro team prior to that. So West Virginia, and I'm sitting here in Pittsburgh, we have a Pittsburgh-fueled outlet. So we're close. WVU is in Morgantown. Morgantown, a lot of those fans are Steeler fans. There's a lot of pro connection around, but it's still in West Virginia, which is a collegiate area, and that college sports are number one there for the Mountaineer fans. So that, I think, does add a connection. The difference, of course, having Oklahoma also in Oklahoma with Oklahoma State, and maybe Oklahoma State being that – I don't want to make this sound like a negative, but a little brother, because Oklahoma gets all the national attention, whereas
they have the majority, and they have the larger fan base. So, no, that's a fair thing.
Yeah, and the Mountaineers don't have that issue because they're the only game in town in West Virginia. And, yes, Marshall's here, but I've done past shows on that rivalry being pretty one-sided and, of course, not a national situation, not a conference situation like Oklahoma and Oklahoma State would have. But, yeah, a couple of years ago, that was rough. I believe there was a 5-win Oklahoma State team. A lot of conversation nationally. Oklahoma ruining the Mountaineers' hopes and almost heaven for West Virginia again. But it was really that game against the Cowboys. If the Mountaineers could have won that game, that would have put them in a situation where they would have been in the conference championship game almost regardless of the end of the year. And I don't think anyone's ever going to be upset if you lose to Oklahoma. but you lose to a
Right.
5-loss team that was not bowl eligible. That maybe causes you to scratch your head a little bit more. So that maybe adds something to this. It's also we do a what's at stake segment for the post-game show here I host. And I do want to maybe ask that just quickly here as we round things out for you here to preview the game, because what's at stake for both of these two teams? We talk about the similarities, and I feel like there's a lot at stake. A loss for Oklahoma State to a Mountaineer team that, let's face it, they're rebuilding and they're good, but they're unranked right now, and a win over Eastern Kentucky is not going to impress anybody. That would really derail the Cowboys from being a perennial top 15 team, realistically probably ruin any hopes of a legit major bowl game unless they really run the table the rest of the way, or the Mountaineers become a top 15 team somehow. The Mountaineers don't have as much pressure because they are rebuilding, but you want to try to get these type of wins because, again, it's very difficult against Oklahoma and even Texas down the line. So what do you believe to be at stake in our still unsponsored segment that we're looking for any steakhouses nearby to jump on board? But what's at stake in this game for Oklahoma State against WVU? It's still an important game as they open up conference play.
Well, it's trying to gain some momentum. And as you said, a lot of things possibly disappear from the standpoint of season goals if you lose this game, because if you're Oklahoma State, you still have to travel to Oklahoma to play. So the Sooners are on the road this year. You need to win all your home games, and that includes a win over Texas. If you're going to try to win the Big 12, get to the championship game, have a chance to be in the college football playoff, which if these injuries are serious to the players I mentioned earlier, I'm not sure that that's a realistic goal anymore.
Probably not,
just being very candid. I would not see how it could be. And again, I'm as positive as anybody, but I think we have to be realistic.
I like it, yeah.
If you've got your quarterback and two offensive linemen out for your whole right side for an extended period of time, that gives you a lot of anxiety. So as much as anything, just trying to hang on to that opportunity. And then also, not only that, but if you are, depleted to some extent, or with all the players not available that I mentioned, quarterback and your right guard and right tackle, can you figure out ways to function? And if those guys are not available, can you find ways to move the football and score points? Which is something they struggled to do on Saturday, and again, struggled to do to some extent even when the starters were out there.
Right.
What people may not know is Oklahoma State was supposed to have two other offensive linemen return. Dylan Galloway was a starter at tackle who chose to end his football career early because of health concerns, and then Bryce Bray was dismissed from the team during preseason camp. He was a starter at right guard. So they were supposed to return two other starters. You end up putting two guys in there that haven't started much, one not at all, and one only 4 games. Well, that was a whole different dynamic than what was supposed to have happened after the conclusion of the 2019 season. Now, both those guys, we're not sure what their status is. Yeah, you kind of get my point. Suddenly, offensive line-wise, certainly for the game this past Saturday, you're really depleted. So all those goals that you have for this team, you better win all your home games. But the thing is that, if you're in a depleted situation, not only do you hopefully win the game, but even if you win the game 15-14, you hopefully find some ways you can move the football. If you are down some of those key players, how are you going to do it? And to some extent, even if those guys play, how are you going to do it? Because it was a little touch and go offensively, even when the entire squad was out there. So yeah, lots at stake and lots of storylines to be settled come Saturday.
It sounds like it. And it also sounds like Mountaineer fans may like watching this particular program, because it sounds like maybe Oklahoma State is maybe on upset alert. It would be an upset based on the 15th ranking and the Mountaineers not being ranked. But if the Mountaineers are ever going to get that revenge for the last few years and not being able to get a victory over the Cowboys, this might be the season based on all those injuries and what's going on. And clearly it's a one-dimensional offense based on what I'm seeing from week 1.
Well, and they should be able to throw it better. I mean, you've got Tyler Wallace, an All-American wide receiver, and multiple other options that they just couldn't get involved for various reasons Saturday. But is Oklahoma State vulnerable this week? Oh, absolutely. I think they are very vulnerable. And I think in our minds, West Virginia is probably better than what most people realize. And Neil Brown, it's not his first whack at things. I mean, he did a great job at Troy.
Yeah.
And I think they're better than what people realize. And I think for Oklahoma State's kind of grinding right now for a number of reasons. So absolutely, this is an upset alert game. I don't think there's any doubt that's the case.
Yeah, so Mountaineering fans get excited. Oklahoma State is on upset alert. It also does sound like that despite the scandal this past offseason, Mike Gundy's tenure probably is not on the hot seat based on all these injuries. I'd imagine he has excuses filled in with what's going on this year. He's been there a long time. There's been certainly success. There's been some disappointment. There's maybe been a thought that he has not yet truly crashed that glass ceiling of taking it to the next level. Really is only a national title situation for Oklahoma State in terms of where he's taken it. But it's been a roller coaster ride. The Mountaineer fans are certainly familiar with that in the past as well, certainly with Holgorsen. But he probably has some built-in excuses for this season to extend that favor amongst fans based on all these injuries, certainly from week one. But look forward to Hubbard. Look forward to, I'd imagine, somebody in Hubbard who's going to want to really salivate and get those 100-plus yards. Another one of those weeks without it, he probably jumps out of the Heisman race altogether, regardless of the team's success. So he really has a lot of pressure on him, a lot of what's at stake for him personally, a lot at stake for both of these two teams. Either way, though, I think we can all agree. It's conference play. It's college football. The fall is now happening in the air, and there's a lot to love about this time of year and about this game in particular, because these are two relatively equally matched programs and teams, even though Oklahoma State certainly it has the edge. This might be a game for many people to maybe put some money down on, because Oklahoma State 8.5-point favorites based on the Vegas line. And if those injuries stay true, even if WVU doesn't get the victory, they might be able to make that game a little closer than what that Vegas spread says. David Hunziker, though, radio play-by-play voice of the Oklahoma State Cowboys football and men's basketball. Dave, I appreciate the time for sure. Hope to talk to you again. Maybe we'll do something here in the future as well.
Sounds good.
Certainly, maybe when we get to basketball season, or maybe we gotta recap things if anything crazy goes down. But Dave, I definitely appreciate the time here. I want to remind all of you to keep checking in throughout the Now network of sites. Hit up WV Sports Now for all your coverage of this game and everything else. Mountaineers, certainly post-game action there. My post-game show will be there, as well as Pittsburgh Sports Live. And make sure you hit the button on the bottom of the screen to make it easier for us to get the content to you and help us pay the bills here, even at our home studios. So Dave, thanks, man. And it's gonna be an interesting one to say the least this Saturday. ABC, it's a 3:30 affair, so there's gonna be some national attention. And I know Mountaineer fans, even with a new coach, they want some revenge on Oklahoma State, and it definitely feels like Oklahoma State is definitely right now on upset alert.